Hey everybody, thanks for coming back to the shop, appreciate it. Alright, so been working on Frank and Nova. You can check out that playlist right here. And I've got to get a rear end built for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drums off this old rear end I've had sitting in the yard, and they're stuck. This is an 8.5 inch 10 bolt out of a 73 Nova. Well, what happens is the shoes get rusted to the drums, and then all the hardware is holding the shoes, won't let them come off the drums, and then you can't slide it off. And there's different ways you can do it. You can beat on it with a hammer and try to knock them loose, but if they've been sitting as long as this one has, and I think it's been sitting in my yard for 6 or 7 years, something like that, it takes a long time to get them, or it takes a lot of beating to get them loose, even if you can. Alright, to get them loose without having to beat the snot out of them a whole bunch, and they'll probably won't come loose that way anyway because this has been sitting so long, there's a few things I do. First, I'm going to clean the threads up with a wire brush around this nut that holds the pin in for the brake shoes. Then I'm going to cut my brake line, and I'm going to take my my bolts from my wheel cylinder loose and bump all that way, and this should move a little bit. Then what I have to do is get this thing far enough over to where I can reach in with some pliers and get my emergency brake cable loose from the hardware there. Let's try that. And you don't have to do this step because there's not a lot of threads there, but as much dirt and stuff is in this one, it'll make sure this nut hopefully doesn't get stuck coming off. There we go. Now I left this nut on this stud so that I could bump that in a little bit. I'm going to bump the wheel cylinder in a little bit, and I'm going to bump this in. I don't want to mess up threads because I don't want to reuse that stud. And you can see the drum's already moved a pretty good bit. And then you take your pry bar, put it right here where I tried beating earlier to see if it's going to come loose. And you can see if you can get this to move very much. It's moving a little bit. I'm going to beat this real gently because I don't want to mess up the threads. And what I'm hoping is I can get this thing far enough. Now what I'm going to do is, that pin broke already, or no, it didn't break, it came loose. I'm going to see if I can knock the other pin loose. If I can knock that spring pin loose, it'll be a lot easier to get this all apart. Well, they usually break pretty easy. This one don't want to, but it will. There we go. Now what I'm going to have to do is get the drum out far enough to get the emergency brake cable loose. And I don't know if the camera's going to pick it up, but you can see it just inside there. Let's see here. Yep. Alright, this is going to take 2 pry bars, I guess. And you get that cable in there. Like I said, I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can get that cable in there, and you should be able to push back on it and it come loose like that. Yep, that's how you get the cable loose. Okay, so now the only thing holding it in is the brake shoes and all the brake hardware stuck to the back of the axle. All that stuff is in on this side of the axle flange, so it's not going to come out without the axle coming out. So what you need to do now is take the axle out, and that's real easy. I'll show you how that works. Okay, on these GM 10 bolts and 12 bolts, the axles are held in by the C-clips inside the spider gear. Now I'm lucky because this one will be easy to turn. Well, it wasn't easy to turn. It was already like this. I'm lucky because my bolt that holds my cross pin in was already at the top. So what I like to do to get that cross, first thing you have to take this bolt out. What I like to do is tap that area, because these things can break and then you've got a problem. It may be an old wives' tale or an old mechanic's tale or whatever. I always take, and I use a brass hammer on a lot of this stuff, is just tap right here a little bit. And then I go in and I get my wrench. That's a 12 point. I like to use a 6 point on something like this, but I'm okay using the 12 point right now. And it came on loose. All right. So I've almost got my cross pin all the way out. All right, that pin's already trying. That's how that looks. This pin is already trying to fall out. Okay, so my cross pin fell down a little bit, but now that I've got that bolt out, I can go ahead and pull my cross pin out. And now I can push my axles in and should be able to get the C-clip out if I can get it spun around enough. I got to get the axle pushed in a little farther. Let me tap it. Tap it with a hammer. I'm going to put my magnet on it. Keep the C-clip from dropping. If I can help it. There we go. And that's how you get the C-clips out. Now with the C-clip out, the whole axle pulls out. And then I get all this loose from the inside. Okay, now that you've got your axle out of the way, if you need to change your axle seal, if you're rebuilding this whole thing, you probably would anyway. The easiest way to get that out is not to use an axle seal puller or anything else, because those, honestly, you have to go find it and all that. While you've got the axle in your hand, and I'm using a clean one that I had laying around, you just put the axle in here and your seal's out. That is the easiest way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to get this other axle and drum out now, and then I'm going to look at my ring gear and pinion and make sure everything's clean and not rusted up there, because this thing's been sitting so long. On this side it looks pretty good, on the back side I can't tell. Now the plan for this rear end is to put it in my 73 Nova that I plasti dipped. You can check out that video right there. The reason I'm doing that is because the rear end that's in there right now, it is an 8.5 inch 10 bolt with C-clip eliminators and Moser axles in it. Now when those axles were done with the C-clip eliminators, you have to cut the end of the housing off for the bearing to have room. They're not very street friendly. I've got about 5,000 miles on that rear end in that car, and they're already leaking. The pinion seal is leaking. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that 8.5 inch 10 bolt, I'm going to put it in Franken Nova with those competition engineering traction bars and put a 410 gear in it. It'll be set to go. This one is going to get a Power Tracks locker in it, so I don't have to reset everything up, which I know how to do that, but the 308 gear is fine with me because this car gets driven a lot of street miles now. So I want something a little bit easier. So anyway, this rear end will get cleaned up, a Power Tracks locker put in it. I think it's going into 73, Franken Nova to 74 that I converted to the 68 to 72 style. You can check that out right here. It's getting the rear end that's in the car now with a 410 gear. And hopefully we'll run some 11s. All right, guys. See you next video. Thanks.